I had a client, she used to ring me up and go, I've been reading the building code. And I said, well, that's not your job. I said, ring me for that sort of stuff, because that's all I do.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Property Developer Podcast. It's great to have you with me. I trust you're well and your projects are progressing along. I have a great show for you today as I speak with a building surveyor about their role in a development project. Before we get to that, here's a quick update on my current projects. The 20 townhouse development construction is continuing along quite well. The plaster is going up in the back townhouses, the external scaffolding is also coming down, and some of the front doors have been hung up. Along the front we are now watertight, however we do have an issue with mould in a large cavity space beneath the kitchen areas, which is behind the back block wall of the garages. There is insufficient airflow through that area and the damp, still air has allowed mould to start growing. So we are having to rectify the airflow problem by cutting a large hole in the back wall of the garage and installing air grates in a couple of spots to ensure there is cross ventilation to stop the mould from growing. The upside will be that the owners will be able to access this cavity space for storage, because it's about the size of a small bedroom, through the large hole that we'll cut, which we'll create as a graded doorway. With the new development project, I'm expecting any day now that the first cut of the town planning drawings will come through from the architect. We have a clear idea about the number of dwellings we will apply to put on the site, and we're now working towards preparing the various reports to support our application, like the arborist report and a review by a private town planner. And we're looking to submit our application in about 4 weeks' time. Okay, on to today's guest, Peter Eyers from Reddo Building Surveyors, a very experienced building surveyor who shares with us what role he plays in a development project. I haven't had much direct contact with the building surveyor on our project, however I know the builder and architect have had regular dealings with him, and I've come to understand that the building surveyor doesn't just have to play a compliance and certification role, but he can help solve problems too. For example, the building surveyor has been helping the builder and the architect to find a solution to the mould issue I just talked about. So in this conversation with Peter, we talk about why a building surveyor is important, what role they play in a development project, and how you can get the most from your building surveyor. I started off by asking Peter, what food would he eat until he was sick?
Nachos.
Nachos?
Yeah, with plenty of jalapenos.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And what other toppings?
Oh, well, you've got to have your guacamole, you've got to have your sour cream, and some cheese. So then that'll get me through. And obviously salsa.
Ah,
yeah.
Any bacon or ham or?
No, maybe some pinto beans.
And in the microwave or traditional in the oven?
No, oven.
Yeah,
you got oven.
It makes a difference to the melted cheese.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the really fiery jalapenos or just
the green. Oh, the green ones. They're okay.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know next time. All right. Well, Peter, we're here today to talk about building surveyors, of which you are one.
I am.
So, can you tell us about how you got into building surveying or becoming a building surveyor?
Yeah, naively. I'd finished sort of a bit of a gap year and had travelled and was back in Melbourne working in bars, doing all that sort of stuff. And then, sort of the pressure from the parents was, well, what are you going to do, with yourself? And I pretty much saw an ad in the newspaper for a course at Swinburne to do building surveying. And I had been a labourer before and, I was quite interested in building, so I thought, I didn't really know what a building surveyor was, but decided, okay, I'll apply. I was a mature age student, so I didn't have to, have any certain. I didn't do HSC. I did Year 12, but I did a practical Year 12, at Brighton Technical School. So, and they accepted me, and I ended up going to uni for 7 years. So, first year was a bit of a shock. Haven't been to school for 3 years, and getting into uni life was a bit different, but yeah. So
7 years for a building surveying course.
Building surveying course, yeah. Well, it's a Bachelor of Bachelor of Applied Science in Civil Engineering. In Building Surveying, and first year, as I said, was tough and failed a few subjects, and so then the following year I made those subjects up.
That's part of the course for
yeah,
a lot of first year uni students.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, O week and all that sort of thing was something I hadn't experienced before. And then you have a work experience year, so you end up going out I went to a local council and worked there for a year, and I ended up staying there, and so I finished part time the degree. So that's why it sort of went out to 7 years in the end. So yes, that's sort of how I got in, and I ended up where I was doing work experience. Ended up being staying there for 3 years, and then finally got into a private company straight after that.
So what kind of skills do building surveyors need?
You need to be able to read plans. That's a pretty good skill to have, and you can get some very detailed documentation, especially on large projects. So you need to be able to read plans. You need to be able to. You need some skills with services as well. You need to be able to understand some computations, some hydraulic computations. You need to be able to read specifications. So yeah, you need to study documentation to make sure that ideally the documentation's right, and that the ultimate outcome is for the builder to have some documentation that they'll build the building correctly. So yeah.
Okay. Perhaps can you tell us a bit more about the role of the building surveyor in the development process? Because I actually haven't had much contact with our building surveyor. He's been a building surveyor, so I don't actually know a great deal about what he does. So if you could just share with us what is the role of the building surveyor?
Well, ultimately our role is to issue you with a building permit. But before we get to that part, we have to assess all the documentation to make sure that it complies. So, we've got various levels of legislation that we use. We use the Building Act, building regulations, building code. Under the building code are all the Australian standards. So there's 4 tiers of legislation that we use. So we'll start off by going through the admin side of things when we ask you for an application form, copy of title, subdivision plans, dial before you dig, all that sort of information. And then we'll get all your consultants, your architect, your structural engineer, your services engineers, submit their documentation to us, and then we'll assess that. 9 times out of 10 you fire back a big list of items that you need clarification on. It can range from 5 on simple jobs to could be 100 on a major project. And so that's you're in consultation then with the design team basically to filter through all your queries. You end up with 2 or 3 months of email correspondence and updated drawings, and until finally I'm satisfied as a building surveyor that the design meets the building regulations, and we issue a building permit. Then you build it, and we're required to come out and check at certain stages. It starts off with you digging your foundations. We'll come and make sure they're the right size, that they're built to the approved drawings. We'll check all your reinforcement before you pour any slabs or footings. And then we'll leave you alone for a bit, and then come out when they're doing the framework. So once the framework's all ticked off, we're gone again, and we'll come back when it's all completed and do a final inspection. If we're happy, we then go back into documentation collection mode and get all the certificates from all your contractors, your builder's statements, your glazier, your electrician, your plumber, all that sort of thing. We'll get that information and we'll issue you with your occupancy permit. You're happy, you give that to the bank gives you your final money, and the builder's happy as well.
So in a
nutshell,
role.
It's a fairly important role. A lot of people say we are an authority in essence, because we issue a document that allows someone to construct a building permit. we don't like to give that perception to our clients, because we like to have that consultancy role about us. So we're there to help our clients. We don't want to be the council policeman, if you know what I mean. But in effect, that's what we are as well. So
okay, and so what kind of interaction does the building surveyor have with the other people that are on the project team? So the designer or the architect and the, I don't know, any of the services people or the builder?
Builder comes on bigger projects. The builder comes along a little bit later, but we get invited to consultant meetings and design meetings. Although we're not a designer or allowed to be involved in the design, we can go to a consultants meeting, and they may have some questions about legislation and how far an exit travel distance can be, or how many stairs rises I'm allowed to have, and we can be there to answer those queries then and there. And normally in those meetings you'd have your architect, maybe even a project manager, your architect, and then your services lead. So you'll have your electrical engineer, your mechanical engineer, hydraulic. You might have a fire service engineer there, and sometimes even a fire engineer who may look at some alternate ways to approve something, if they use some fire modelling or something like that. So, so we'll get involved in that, and then it's the typical design process where you get minutes of meetings, and you start to answer questions, and you get sketches sent to you to see if they're okay, and you can give them the tick. You see that's fine, then they'll go into full sort of documentation mode. So we get a lot of queries, a hell of a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, leading up to them starting construction.
And what kind of projects do you work on, or does Reddo oversee?
It's sort of driven by the economy and the industry. At the moment it's a lot of multi-unit residential. There's a fair few high-rise going on in the CBD at the moment. A lot of education, mainly private and Catholic school education. There's still a lot of building work going on there. A lot of, as has always been through my career, a lot of residential, domestic type new houses, additions to houses, that sort of thing. Not so much now the industrial, commercial side of things. 5-6 years ago, we were doing a lot of factories, which are great. They're
just 4 walls and a roof.
Some concrete and steel, and and they're done in 9-10 months, and they move on to the next one. They don't really care about them. No one's living in them, so you don't get people complaining about why their window doesn't open. And so so at the moment, a majority of our work is multi-unit residential. So how long that's going to go for, who knows? They still seem to be coming through the door. So,
and so, what kind of role what kind of value does a building surveyor add to a developer, or can they add?
You think we can provide them with up-to-date advice. With the introduction of performance-based building regulations, where you have like an objective to meet rather than a prescriptive requirement in terms of, say, an exit travel distance, you're allowed to have 20 metres to a door, or there's a statement that says you must have sufficient exits to provide adequate level of egress. So you can gauge fire engineers and develop alternate solutions that sometimes sites are constraining, and there's a limit on how many exits they can have from a building. There might only be one, so we can approve those alternate solutions by fire engineers. So we go into design meetings with an open mind. Let the client tell us what they would like to achieve, and we'll try and help them achieve it. We've still got clients now that go, no, I want a deemed to satisfied building. I want my building to comply with the prescriptive requirements of the building code. okay, no problem for us. We can help you with that. We like to get involved in the design process. Again, I'll keep saying that we can't design because that's what the Victorian Building Authority like us to say. When we don't design, we go in there and we provide our expert opinions, and tell people that, you can't have 19 rises in your stair. You can have 18, but not 19. So, and Reddo, we got there's three of us that are directors and building surveyors. We like to go to meetings. We like our client to see us at the meetings, and we like to our client to know who we are, because some owners or property developers don't know who their building surveyor is, and so we'd like to know who they are, and so we're there, and we're there to help them ultimately get a compliant building that's safe because it complies with the building code. So.
And is it hard to stay on top of the various changes or building codes or whatever's required? Because it seems to be reams and reams of these sort of standards when you start looking into them.
Yep, and especially more recently with a couple of issues there's been with fire and that sort of thing. We get a lot of updates from industry, from the VBA, from our institute, Australian Institute of Building Surveyors. One of my business partners is active in the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors, is on some committees with the Australian Building Codes Board. So he's at the forefront of that, and we tend to get that information before it even goes to be legislated. So we'll know a year, 18 months out that this is going to happen. So we've got that at our disposal, and we like to update our clients with that information if we think it's relevant. So we think we're at the forefront of that, and there is a lot.
Because I've looked through some of the building codes and standards from time to time. My eyes just start glazing over. They're very difficult to understand.
They are. You've got to know how to read them. Fortunately enough, I've been reading them for over 20 years, so you sort of know where to go. The book, the building code is very thick, but you tend to know to which page to go to. And I actually, had a cadet in last week it was a fairly simple problem he had, but I could tell he was battling on where to find the solution, and the solution was in an Australian standard, not in the building code. And so you have to know how to read them, and you have to read them till you understand them, because sometimes legislation is not easy to read. And I still now read certain parts of the Act 3, 4, 5 times just to make sure, okay, I'm clear. I'm clear on how I'm interpreting that. And then there's a spot there where it says you need to now read AS 1428 or whatever it is, and that's when the cadet goes, oh, okay, right, so I need to read that as well. Yes, you do. So a simple problem can be you could be reading 3 pieces of legislation to actually find the answer, and it's important then you know the hierarchy of the legislation as well. Yeah.
Well, from what you're telling me, I think best to leave all that to the building surveyor and the architects
I had a
sort
client,
that stuff out.
I had a client who I used to. She used to ring me up and go, "Oh, I've been reading the building code." And I said, "Well, that's not your job." I said, "Ring me for that sort of stuff because that's all I do." Yeah.
No wonder you sleep so well at night.
Yeah, you're sick of it. Yeah.
And then, so tell us, how do you go about finding a good surveyor then?
I think you need to make sure that the surveyor's got experience in your project. I know from experience, one of my business partners just does not do houses, so I wouldn't get him to check my house because there's a whole range of different requirements, from siting of the house to number of car parks to peril area, that sort of thing. So it's important to make sure that your surveyor's got experience in that area, and you can do that by pretty much asking for their experience in that in particular spot. And there's some colleagues in the industry who refer refer work to me because they feel that it's not the right job for them, and vice versa. And so we've got a good working relationship with a few other companies who and you'd hope all building surveyors did that and didn't take on something that they didn't think they could, because that's not in the best interest of the client. So, yeah, my advice to anyone would be to get some proof of experience, or ask questions about their experience, and maybe even their architect, their design team who work in that sort of field all the time. They would have their preferred, I guess, surveyors. So, you can just ask questions, consult your design team.
And I know you've already touched on going to design meetings, but what kind of relationship would a developer have with the building surveyor on the job?
Well, you have a relationship with them up front. You tend to, a lot of our clients are property developers, so you have a relationship with them. You tend to see them at the first couple of meetings, and then they tend to disappear, and because they're looking for other things to do or other properties to buy, whatever. But if something happens, there's an issue, we're always there to talk to the property developer, the client, the owner, to make sure that they get the proper solution. And obviously, they're always worried about cost, so we need to make sure that we can help them and alleviate those issues that generally happen during construction. When you get the property developer on the phone and something's being built and he wants to talk to you, he's looking at trying to save some money somewhere. So, that's the sort of relation we try and have with them.
So share with us, when you go on site,
Yep.
what are you actually looking at and looking for?
We'll be looking to make sure it's right. So, and it depends on when I go there. I don't tend to go and do any inspections anymore. I like to leave that to the building inspectors. This morning I was on site with the client, or the client is the builder. They're probably 6 or 7 weeks from finishing, and they just wanted me to go around and walk around with them just to see if there's anything I could see that may cause them a problem in the final week. They don't want those issues then, they want them now. Perfect example today, it's a 4-storey apartment building. I go around, I check balustrade heights. I check riser going dimensions, handrails, penetrations in firewalls, any other questions that the builder's concerned with. We look at all those things because they're hard to fix. When things are tiled and carpeted and painted, they're a lot more expensive to fix. So, they're the things that tend to catch most people at the end of a project, is those sorts of things. So we go and do that and say, look, make sure your handrail's the right height and your balustrade's the right, it's got the right gaps. There's nowhere where kids can climb, that sort of thing. So that's what I did this morning. And then, we'll go back in 5 weeks' time and hopefully it's all done and finished and it's ready to be occupied.
So you just mentioned the building inspector. So what's the difference between a building inspector and a building surveyor?
Building inspector is pretty much on site. So they're there to check the mandatory inspection stages of a project. So they're our eyes and ears, the building surveyor's eyes and ears. You don't need to have a degree in applied science, bachelor of building surveying. I'm not sure of the actual tertiary qualification, but so they're a registered inspector, and they pretty much all go on site all day, every day, and they're our eyes on site, and they'll either approve or not approve the inspections for us. And if they have issues, they'll ring us to discuss them on site.
So is that things like the trusses are not being screwed in with the right size
Correct.
screws?
Yeah, and that's where I profess I'm not an expert in timber framing, or I can go on site and it'd probably take me 3 times as long to do an inspection as what the inspector would, because he does it every day and he's used to it all. He's up with the latest techniques, and so pretty much that he'll check your timber sizes, he'll look at your bracing, he'll do all that sort of thing. So That's the main difference. We sit in the office there in the on site.
So I'm sure there's all sorts of industry gags and tension between the inspectors and the surveyors.
They tend to think they're there at the coalface, is what is the common one in our office, and I tend to. Whenever I'm going on site, I put the work boots on and the high vis and the helmet, and and they just look at me and laugh when I walk out the door. So.
All right, so what kind of questions do you think it's important to ask a building surveyor before you would appoint them?
Oh, experience, have you done this sort of work before? What sort of value have you added to any previous projects? Why should I appoint you instead of the guy down the road? I don't get asked that question much. Our sort of business is based on clientele that we've had for a long time, and so there was a period when you were quite busy and you probably were a bit flippant with having those questions asked. You'd sort of almost go, well, if you don't want to use me, you don't have to. There's plenty of others, but when things change, you tend to be a little bit more cooperative with those sorts of queries. So we try and sell ourselves. With our experience, we know we can do any job that's put in front of us, and we've got enough experience. Combined probably 65 years experience, I suppose, if you had it all together. But
what about red flags?
Price. If
too low,
too cheap, My biggest beef has been we used to do a lot of government work, and to even do a fee proposal for a government project, you get their tender documentation. You have to read it, because within their tender documentation it'll say you're required to do 2 site visits prior to commencement and 1 at the end. Now that's fine, but I had a job in Swifts Creek, which it's a 5-hour drive. Okay, and then you had the meeting time, and then 5. That's a day. So you need to allow for that. And I've lost projects where a building surveyor's been a quarter of my price. And you go to the design team, you ask him, well, has he read the tender documentation and the requirements? And you say, well, if he hasn't, that's bad luck. So you need to. That's a big warning. If it's not a realistic construction or price that's based on the construction, then you need to be wary, because there might be shortcuts. You might need a building surveyor on site, and he hasn't allowed for it in his fees. You ring him up, say, I need you out, and he's going, well, sorry, I haven't allowed for that. Then the client's stuck. So I think that is a red flag. I guess it's a very small industry, the building surveying industry. So we all sort of know each other, and I think you tend to the better clients, or the clients have had a lot of experience, know who they want anyway. But there's always new players that come in and that sort of thing. But probably that would be my only advice to anyone who's looking to employ a surveyor. But shop around, get 3-4 quotes. Everyone's always happy to do a proposal, and you can tell by some of the proposals you get that they've got some expertise and some experience.
And so, is the cost dependent on a percentage of the build, or is there some sort of idea that you can get on what the cost should be for a surveyor?
Well, it depends where you live too, Justin. So if you're in Bayside, your price might be a bit higher than the western suburbs. But we base it on a construction cost, pretty much. And if we don't get a construction cost, we'll estimate it. So we'll look at the floor area. We've got a rate that we use that we believe is the proper rate for construction, and we'll price it accordingly. There's also site constraints. We'd like to look at a plan to see what they're proposing to do. If it's built on all 4 boundaries, you need to then think, well, there's going to be some consultation with adjoining owners. If it's a residential project, that's going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more time. So that there's those things we take into account as well, and based on our client experience, so we know some clients are hard to deal with. Well, you charge accordingly because you know you're going to be working harder.
The pain premium.
Yeah, there's always that. So yeah.
Can you tell us about any disasters that you've had to see on site, or things that you've helped to avoid that would have been disastrous further down the track?
I've stood in an excavation on Camberwell Road for 5 hours waiting for the builder to arrive. I just happened to be driving past, and the site was cut 3 metres straight down on a driveway that was a medical clinic, and that wasn't how it was supposed to be done. So
you were a building surveyor.
I was a building surveyor, and I happened to drive past and went, that doesn't look right, and I went, okay, that's not good.
Okay, so just for listeners out there who aren't aware, this was an excavation that ended up collapsing, didn't it?
It didn't collapse, thank God. It didn't collapse, but I stood there waiting for the builder to get there, and the engineer was on the phone to the the structural engineer as well, and telling him he needs to get out here and come up with a temporary propping method for this excavation. The builder was very reluctant to meet me on site, and I said, well, I'm not moving until you get here, and no more work's being carried out until you get here. So I've had a couple of those. So I'm touching the timber table now. I haven't had any disasters, and we don't. You wake up in the morning, you listen to the news, and you hear, there's a fire, and you're sort of waiting for where it is, and you're always thinking about those sorts of things. But we've been doing it a long time, and we've got comfort in our systems that that the documentation that we've approved is okay, and it's just dependent that the builder builds to that documentation.
Okay.
Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they don't, and sometimes we don't have control of that. We can't be on site all day every day.
So how do you find that out? How do you know if it's not being built to plan, and then what happens?
The best policeman is your next door neighbour. Right? They'll be on the phone straight away. Local council, they're roaming around the municipality, so they'll call you up and say, look, this doesn't look right.
What are we talking about though?
It could be anything. It could be fence height, because that fence looks too high, or there's been a lot of incidents lately. There was the disaster in East Brighton where the bricklayer unfortunately was killed due to the wall being blown over. So an industry alert goes out, and it was a directive that if you're driving out anywhere and you see something that you don't think's right, even if it's your site or not, just say something, ring the council and that sort of thing. So you do that now. And I was driving back here today. I drove past the site, and there's a painter standing on the roof, and there's no guardrails or anything, and you think, you shouldn't be doing that, That's not necessarily a design thing, it's just an OH&S issue. So you're always sort of looking for those things. But there's plenty of people out there that are, will say something if they think there's something wrong. And every site has to have site contact details on it. So every building site has to have the name of the builder, has to have the name of the building surveyor, and their contact details. So that, if something happens, there's some contacts there that we can ring. And, if we get a phone call that something's happening, we generally drop everything to make sure that something gets rectified. But, again, unfortunately, builders do change things and they don't tell us sometimes, and we may never find out. And
what kind of things would you never find out about?
Insulation in a wall, because we're not there every day. We might go do a frame inspection. So you go and check the frame. The frame's perfect. It's magnificent. It's all approved. You're right to proceed. So there's a lot of stuff that happens after that frame inspection. All the wiring's completed, all the plumbing's completed, all the plastering's done, the insulation's done, the brick walls could be built, brick ties, all that sort of thing. You can't see that at the final inspection. We walk into a beautifully finished house that's painted, and you have to take your shoes off before you walk in. So we don't know what insulation's gone into the walls, unless we cut a hole. Now, the builder's going to be pretty cranky if we start doing that. So we rely on a builder telling us that he's put in this type of insulation. The plumber then gives a certificate saying he's completed his work in accordance with the standards. Same with the electrician. So you do rely on statements and the builders being honest. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes things haven't been constructed properly. And that's when the problems start. When the buildings are occupied and they find a problem, waterproofing is a big one. Leaks and that sort of thing. So the builder has to come back and fix them and that sort of thing. So that's what can happen. You hope they don't, but they do. It's just through the nature of our industry, unfortunately.
And so post-construction and completion, is there any ongoing role for the building surveyor?
Yeah, look, we not only do we issue building permits, we do a lot of consulting work. So, I've got a project at the moment. We're talking about leaks. This department was built 7 or 8 years ago, and there's leaks all over the place. They've been to VCAT, all that sort of thing. They've been issued with directions, but the owners want the work supervised. So we're meeting with the builder who's going to fix it. We're asking him for his scope on how he's going to fix it, and we'll go out there and watch him fix it. So that's a sort of a role we also do. We audit buildings. We look at essential safety measures for buildings, all the commercial buildings that have fire services, emergency lights, exit signs. We can help them with their maintenance. A lot of building owners don't understand their responsibilities. They own a commercial building, but they then need to maintain all their essential safety measures. So we do a lot of those. We do a lot of work in the liquor industry, liquor licensing. They need to, excuse me, whenever they get a new liquor licence or change a liquor licence, we have to give them a statement that tells them how many people they can have in their premises. So we do that sort of stuff as well. So there's a whole range of things we do. We're not just stuck into building permits, although that's the majority. So we've got a lot of expertise in a whole range of building work, and we've actually just started branching out into some project management of building permits. So I've got a client who's building 2 aged care facilities in Queensland. The design team's here, but we're we're part of that, and we've told them, well, we'll look after your certification for you. You don't have to worry about that. So we're looking after that. We'll check it, then ultimately give a package to a certifier in Queensland for him to issue the approval. So, and it's working well for our client. He wants that because he's got a building surveyor there who can help with his project, and doesn't have to call the guy from Queensland to come down or get him on the phone or that sort of thing. So
So you've probably been through a few tape measures over the years.
Yeah, a few tape measures. There's always someone's always looking for a tape measure in the office. They get very protective of their tape measure too. They put their name on them. So yeah.
All right. So what are some of the biggest problems you've seen over the years?
Look, the biggest problem is probably the poor quality of work sometimes. That's our biggest problem. And it's the perception of the public that we, as a building surveyor, are the clerk of works, or we're we should be supervising the project. We can only assess a job that we have the power to under the Building Act. We can't look at the paint colour and say, look, it's the wrong paint colour. It's not our role. But unfortunately, the public, we tend to be the first port of call when there's a problem on site, because we're the building surveyor. We should be, because we have the power to issue building notices and orders. that we're the policemen, that we should take control. So that's our biggest problem, and our biggest pain is dealing with builders who don't do the right thing, and also people not understanding what our role actually is. Our role is to make sure that the building permit documentation is correct and the building permit's issued, and the builder on site carries out his work in accordance with those drawings. And we can do that by visiting site during the mandatory inspection stages, which there's only 4 of, and that's the footings, reinforcement, frame and final. We don't go in between any of those. We're not required to by legislation, and nor should we. It's the builder's responsibility to make sure that they've got the quality control to make sure that their subcontractors carry out the work accordingly. So it's getting caught up in those sorts of issues that really cause us. You don't get paid for that sort of stuff, and generally in residential projects, when you're dealing with someone's home, they've got some emotional tie to it as well. So as much as you want to try and help people, sometimes you can't, and you have to put it back on the builder. Sometimes the builder's not around anymore. So that's when some big problems occur, and they have to rely on insurance, the warranty insurance, etc. So, yeah.
And do you play a role in that with warranty insurance?
No, we don't. Our role only is to collect a copy of that policy for the building permit. We need to make sure that the contract that is entered into by the builder and the owner is similar to what is on the warranty insurance. So we need to check that the builder's name is correct and is on there, and then if it's a company, we have to check the company to make sure the builder's a director. So there's some certain checks and balances we need to do before we issue the building permit. But once that we're satisfied with that, then really it's a policy that belongs to the owner in the event that the builder won't fix anything or has disappeared or is bankrupt. So obviously that's only on domestic projects. So that's all we get. That's the only role we have in that process.
And then from your side, what is it you like to see from developer clients in their interactions with you or the relationship they have with you? What things can they do to make it a positive experience or to get the best result?
Sometimes we need our project manager or our developer or our owner to help us with the design team. Sometimes we do get a lot of people going, well, why do I need to do that? Well, because it's in the legislation. That's why. So you do get people who question your decisions. So sometimes you've got to go to the developer and go, look, can you have a chat to your builder? We're doing the right thing here, and ultimately it's you that wins. You're the property owner. You come out with a finished product. Your builder's not towing the line. Have a chat to him, and you're certainly going to start paying attention to the guy who's paying your bills, rather than me who sits in his office and telling the builder what to do. Sometimes they don't like it. We're not there to make their job hard. We're there to make sure that the finished product is safe and compliant for the owner. So, yeah.
You're not there to make their job easier as well, though.
We try, but sometimes...
Well, if they're trying to cut corners and make it easy for them, that's not your job.
And sometimes we don't have that power. Sometimes, for example, a staircase that doesn't comply. The treads and rises are not constant. The builder will go, it's only a little bit out. Yeah, it is, but I don't have the power or the authority to say, don't worry about it. If I did that and someone falls down the stairs, the builder's going to go, the building surveyor said it's fine. So, there are times like that you don't like to say no, but you have to. Yeah.
And so at the end of the construction, which is the important or particularly important time for a developer when they're getting all their certificates together and they can get the titles off and settle, what role do you play in that, and is there anything the developer can do to speed things along there?
The builder tends to manage that quite well because they get their final payment is staring them in the eye. So they tend to get all these certificates through to us fairly promptly. The developer again would only sort of help if there was some problems with the builder. Was being a little bit reluctant to do something we've asked to do. Maybe we've picked something up at the final inspection that doesn't comply. But typically we find at the end of the job the builder's pretty keen to get out of there and will pretty much do anything to get it over the line. We tend to get the client tends to call us if it's getting down to the wire. It's a Friday at 4:00 and his OC permit's ready to go and you can flick them straight onto the bank. You tend to get the phone calls then. If you're doing a job where there's an opening, it's going to open that night. The phone calls tend to come a bit thicker and faster when there's something hinging on it. But we tend to try and get it done, and we realise the importance of that for the client, that they need that little piece of paper that seems to be so valuable for the bank. And it's amazing the week before Christmas, how many people need their building permit when nothing's going to happen until sort of mid-January. It's amazing how busy a building surveyor is in the last week of December. So, the developer tends not to get too involved at that end. Yeah.
All right. And then have you got one top tip for developers out there to help them take their business to the next level?
I think we've always said you need to spend some good money on your design team. I think if you try and save some money on consultants, then sometimes things don't go as well as they can. Some of the best jobs I've worked on have been some of the biggest with the best design consultant teams, because they know they've done it before. So pick your consultants that have had experience in the project that you're planning, and I think if you pick the right ones, and your project will run a lot smoothly than if you don't.
And is that you can get tips and leads from, say, your lead designer on the consultants?
Yeah, your architect would tend to have their preferred design team. Your project manager, if it's that size project that you've decided to appoint someone like that, then I'd say choose a good project manager. We've had experience with some project managers that I think cost the client more money than they should. So it's just the quality of the consultant. I think concentrate on that.
All right. So where can people find out more about you, Peter?
About me? I'm on LinkedIn, so you can see me there. We've got our company Reddo is also on LinkedIn, and we're in the process of rebuilding our website. So reddo.com.au. There'll be a for construction or coming soon page at the moment, but I know my business partner's feverishly working with a designer at the moment, so we're hoping that'll be up soon. Or send me an email if you've got any queries. Peter@reddo.com.au. It's an easy one. Double D in Reddo. Happy to try and help anyone out.
A certain sense of irony of a building surveyor's website being under construction.
Yeah, exactly. I hope it's got a permit.
All right, Peter, that's a good point to leave it. Thanks very much for your time and sharing your insights on the Property Developer Podcast. I'm very grateful to you.
No problem. Thanks for your time.
Speak to you soon.
Will do. Thanks, Justin.
Okay, so there you go. I trust you enjoyed that discussion with Peter. I certainly learnt that the building surveyor has quite an important role to play in your development project. And here's the lessons I took away from my conversation. 1. Talk to your building surveyor about ways that they may be able to help you. This is something I didn't do at the start of the project, but next time I'll be having a conversation early about how the building surveyor can add value to the project, or ways they can be involved in the development process. I think a good surveyor will be able to add suggestions along the way that will help reduce cost and improve the result you get. 2. Make sure to use the right surveyor. As Peter said, ensure you engage a building surveyor who has experience in your type of project. You want someone who has lots of experience looking over the types of product or construction techniques that you're using for your build, so that they know what to look out for or be able to provide advice and ideas on ways to improve things or problems to avoid. And 3, don't skimp on your consultants. Always try and hire the best people you can for the job. It can be tempting to go for the lowest cost option, especially for something that you may not perceive as directly adding value to your product. But the wrong hydraulic option or structural solution can easily increase cost and complexity to a build. Okay, so that's it for this episode. Thanks again to Peter Eyers from Reddo Building Surveyors for sharing his knowledge and insights into the role of the building surveyor. I certainly enjoyed speaking with him. For all the past episodes of the show, you can head over to the Property Developer Podcast website, which is propertydeveloperpodcast.com, or you can catch me on Instagram at Property Developer Podcast for my development pictures and photos. Otherwise, I'm occasionally on Facebook and Twitter. So until next time, may all your building inspections get signed off.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.